Warning, the following podcast may contain spoilers for a 37-year-old horror movie. Welcome to the Intermission Time podcast, where we take a look at films from the drive-in era. My name is Matthew, and I'm joined in the studio today with my friend and fellow B-movie connoisseur, Evil Jim.
Hi.
Jim, how are we doing this evening?
Well, I've been better, but I kind of lost my voice yelling at this movie the last time I saw it, but I'm glad to be here today.
That's understandable, and the reason why he would be yelling at the movie is because today we're looking at the 1977 tribute to all things slasher and drive-in theaters, Drive-In Massacre, a movie that takes place in a California drive-in in the 1970s and follows the investigations of a series of murders at a drive-in theater. As I stated before, it follows a series of murders at a California drive-in. Often these are couples who, one of them seems to, in each case, at least the first couple cases, we've got a couple, one who wants to watch the movie, the other one doesn't. So, in our first case, we've got our hero, who's in the movie for about 30 seconds. He wants to listen to the movie. His girlfriend doesn't. He's reaching out to get the speaker, and
Swish.
That's
his head and his arm thanks to a nice samurai sword slice.
Yeah, and the effect is actually pretty good. You see the sword come down across the neck, and you see a body with a severed head. I don't think you actually see the head, though, if I remember correctly. Do you? And as his girlfriend discovers what has happened, she begins screaming bloody murder until our killer decides to silence her in the most
stabbed through the throat.
That makes sense. Yeah, that's about the best way they can do it. And it works. She does quiet real quickly, and unfortunately, also kills her, And that brings us to our cops. Our lovable duo, pair of bumbling cops who resemble Jodan Baker from Mitchell.
Both of them.
They're not very good detectives. But then when you see what they have to deal with, you can kind of see why they're not very good detectives. Because we have our pair of suspects that they decide to interview. We have Mr. Austin Johnson, our bald, nasty, what do they call him in the movie?
He's been referred to as a bald trash can.
That seems like an accurate portrayal. And then we have Jeremy, our janitor, handyman, former sword swallower geek carnival attraction.
Yeah, it's worth noting that this drive-in is built on the same property as a former carnival where both Austin Johnson and Jeremy worked.
Yeah, they were both sword swallowers, so of course that immediately makes them suspects, though
the swords are in question because the owner of the theater still has them, but presumably travels with them wherever he goes, and at the time of the interview, the owner was
currently in Hawaii.
In Hawaii, presumably.
So theoretically, these two should be suspects, but the movie does try and give us some other suspects as well, such as our peeping Tom.
Gurmy noticed a fellow that never stays in one place. He's always moving, changing places in his car and looking at all the other couples.
Despite his pleas to please stay in his car. Of course he doesn't. And he's definitely the peeping Tom sort. And the cops decide that they're going to come and pay him a visit. He's not the nicest character, but ultimately they kind of determine this really isn't their guy. After a brief and meaningless chase, they don't find any swords, there's no knives, and ultimately we get to the next night at the drive-in, and With the next murder, he's also included in that murder this time.
And you'd think that after the first pair of murders, the drive-in might close down.
Nah, it's just an inconvenience.
To maybe aid in the police investigation, preserve evidence. Nope. Still open.
And why not? Austin's a jerk. He really doesn't want to cooperate anyways. Why would he close the drive-in? And so, the murders continue. By this point, we've now got 6 murders, and lo and behold, our cops get a possible break in the case. They hear over the radio the possibility of a man with a machete who has killed 2 people.
The suspect has been cornered in a warehouse with a hostage.
And now the movie gets weird. We're now in the last 15 minutes of the movie at this time. It's only 75 minutes. So, 10 minutes of this is spent in the warehouse with this machete-wielding madman chasing this little girl. The chasing goes on for 6-7 minutes before our cops show up. And then we get the biggest punch in the gut up to this point. Our cops show up, all heroic. They come into the warehouse. They find our suspect and immediately shoot him. Shoot him dead. They don't question him. They don't try to arrest him. They shoot him. And the little girl comes up, drops on her knees, and questions, "You didn't have to kill him. Why did you have to kill my dad?" Does this have anything else to do with the rest of the movie? No. No, it doesn't. And we immediately return to our drive-in theater, where things are now starting to come to a head. Jeremy has been fired earlier in the day by Mr. Austin. And Jeremy, being the nice guy that he portrays to be, has finally had enough. So he decides Mr. Austin has shown some interest in the owner's sword collection, which we've now discovered Jeremy actually has. And Jeremy decides that he's going to, well, for use of a better phrase, he's going to let him have it. And so what does he do?
He follows Mr. Austin Johnson into the projection booth, and on screen, apparently they're doing this right in front of the projector, we see one of the last murders of the film.
But who killed who?
Exactly.
We don't know. Our cops show up into the projection booth, and at that point, we then get the best ending ever with a freeze frame and a text box that just states, quote, "The senseless bloodbath that's gripped a California drive-in has spread to other theaters throughout the country. Authorities say there are no clues to the killer's identity and no end to the horror in sight. The killer could strike again, anywhere, anytime. Who will be next?"
I tell you, this had me shivering in my pants sitting on your couch the night we saw it.
So are we safe to assume that the cops didn't arrest anybody?
Hey, maybe they were the final victims.
They're incompetent enough that this would not shock me. Mm-hmm. This movie is not very good. It is highly entertaining, which is why we've been able to sit through it on multiple occasions. There are so many things that are wrong about this movie. The sound is awful. The directing is awful. The soundtrack is awful.
Hey man, I love that soundtrack.
The entire movie looks like it was filmed with a dark filter over it. You can't see anything, which seems to fit well because you can't hear anything either. As we were watching it, I joked to my girlfriend. I said, "I'm surprised that the boom mic doesn't show up anywhere in the film." Her response was, "I don't think they used a boom mic."
It sounded like they had a one mic setup.
Exactly. So, if you want to seek out Drive-In Massacre, you can find it. It is in the public domain. You can go to archive.org and find it. Otherwise, it is also available on DVD.
As of this recording, it's also available in its entirety on YouTube.
Again, the movie is public domain, so knock yourselves out if you're really interested in this. Well, Jim, I appreciate you coming in tonight, and that wraps it up. This has been an episode of Intermission Time Podcast. Remember, you can find this podcast and others at vikingdrive-in.com and on Twitter at vikingdrivein. So until next time,